Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Barbara McQuade with us today. We'll chat with Barb in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Barbara McQuade is a professor at the University of Michigan Law School, where she teaches criminal law and national security law. She is also a legal analyst for NBC News and MSNOW and co-host of the #Sisters-in-Law podcast. From 2010 to 2017, she served as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. She was appointed by President Barack Obama and was the first woman to serve in her position. Earlier in her career, she worked as a sports writer and copy editor and judicial law clerk, an associate in private practice, and an assistant U.S. attorney. She's the author of the national bestseller, Attack from Within, and is here today to discuss her new book, The Fix, Saving America from the Corruption of a Mob-Style Government. Barb, welcome into the back room.
Thanks, Andy. I'm glad to be here with you.
So congrats on the release of the book, The Fix. You open the book by comparing aspects of modern American politics to the tactics used by organized crime. You've prosecuted public corruption cases and organized crime figures. What would you say is the strongest parallel you see between a mob boss's playbook and the way power is being exercised in Washington today by Donald Trump and his capos?
I would say it's the use of power as leverage to obtain more power. And so, certainly that is something that mob bosses and corrupt public officials use. That they have power, they have access to money and contracts and other kinds of things, and they inflict pain on their targets in order to coerce them to come to the table to negotiate their own punishment. And I think we've seen some of the same tactics with Donald Trump. I think about his dismissal of the criminal case against New York Mayor Eric Adams, but they wanted to do it without prejudice so they could keep that case dangling over him while they decided whether they were satisfied with the way he was enforcing the president's immigration agenda. I think we saw it in the way the president issued those executive orders against law firms, accusing them, baselessly of violating the law simply by associating themselves with people who had worked on cases against Donald Trump. I think we've seen it the way he has tried to coerce universities to change their curricula or else lose some of their grant funding. I think we've seen it with the media, the way we have seen the filing of some frivolous defamation suits, in my opinion, and some of those media outlets caving and deciding they'd rather just sort of pay off than have to, have trouble with the president. But I think one lesson that I learned in the work I did as a prosecutor is that people who pay the extortionist think they're going to pay him once and everything's going to be okay. But of course, in fact, what happens is once you pay the extortionist, they just keep coming back for more. And I think that's something that we're seeing here in American society today.
That leads me to my next question, which is what you call Trump's, quote, mastery of leverage and how it's benefited him. Speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things that I think was a real influence on President Trump was his association with attorney Roy Cohn. He is often asked, where's my Roy Cohn? Roy Cohn, of course, was a lawyer who got his start as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, where he learned how things are done properly, the right way. And then he became counsel to Joseph McCarthy's committee during the Red Scare. And so he learned how to manipulate people. He then spent most of his career as lawyer to the mafia. He and Donald Trump met when he represented Trump and his father in a case where they were sued by the Department of Justice for race discrimination in housing buildings. And I think what Roy Cohn taught Donald Trump is to admit nothing, deny everything, turn the tables on your accusers, always go on the offensive. And I think that's what we see with President Trump, looking for ways to lift levers of power over other people so that he can get them to do what he wants. I mean, right now in my home city of Detroit, the Gordie Howe Bridge between Detroit and Canada was set to open last Friday. There was a ribbon cutting scheduled, and it was delayed for unknown reasons. President Trump has said that we need to make sure Canada pays their fair share before we open it. Canada paid for the whole bridge. And so it seems to me that he is once again trying to use leverage to extract some sort of benefit for himself by delaying the opening of that bridge.
Yeah, well, it's so true. He has for years and years and years whined about, I want my Roy Cohn. Did he find and get his Roy Cohn first in Pam Bondi and now in Todd Blanche?
Yeah, I think Pam Bondi was willing but not able. She did attempt to charge people like Letitia James and James Comey, but of course those cases kind of fell apart because of what a court found was an illegal appointment of the U.S. Attorney in the district where those cases were returned. He fired her, and now we've got Todd Blanche, first as the acting and now as the nominee to be the Attorney General. And it may be that this is Donald Trump's Roy Cohn. Like Roy Cohn, Todd Blanche got his start as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, where he learned how it is done and how the system works. And it seems to me that at least lately he has been exploiting the powers of the law to advance the president's agenda. These baseless charges, in my opinion, against James Comey for posting seashells arranged in the numbers 8647. I mean, you can look on an Amazon page and find hundreds of vendors selling T-shirts with that image, and none of those were charged.
Yeah, I used to work when I was a kid, I used to work in restaurants, and 86 meant we were out of the chicken parm.
Yeah, exactly. So, the idea that that's a death threat, I think seems highly unlikely to me. But, some of the other things that we have seen from this attorney general, there's this grand conspiracy investigation going on in Florida against people who were in the intelligence community in 2016 when they were exploring connections between Russia and the Trump campaign. And then there was this whole weaponization compensation fund that Todd Blanche negotiated. Although they've pulled back from that amid outcry from Congress and the public, they still have on the table this immunity for President Trump's tax claims and audits for the rest of his life for any tax returns filed prior to the signing of that settlement. And some experts say that forgives unpaid tax bills of up to $100 million for Donald Trump. That's taxpayer money. So it seems like Todd Blanche is willing to do what Jeff Sessions wasn't able to do. He recused himself from the Russia investigation. What William Barr was not willing to do, he refused to claim falsely that there was fraud in the 2020 election. Pam Bondi maybe wasn't up to the challenge, but it seems like Todd Blanche has both the skill set and the willingness to do Trump's bidding as the Attorney General.
Yeah, I'm an old crime buff, like a mafia crime buff. And I think back to the days of John Gotti and Bruce Cutler, his attorney. And while Blanche isn't as bombastic as Cutler was, I used to think, like, this is a lawyer? Like, he seems to be crossing lines every time he speaks, with every action he does, every time he walks into a courtroom. And it's unfathomable in a way, historically, that we think of the United States Attorney General as someone like Todd Blanche.
Yeah, the Attorney General is supposed to represent the people. I can remember when I was appointed U.S. Attorney in Detroit, all of us U.S. attorneys had a chance to visit the White House during our orientation in Washington. And what President Obama told us is consistent with the way every president post-Watergate, I think, looked at the job. And he said, even though I appointed you, remember, you don't represent me. Your duty is to the Constitution and the American people. And I think that's the way we've thought of it, at least since the Watergate era, 50 years. And now instead, it seems that the president wants and maybe has obtained in Todd Blanche an attorney general who sees it as President Trump's own personal law firm and as a place and a source where he can obtain retribution against people that he believes have crossed him in the past.
Yeah, I think that the hardest thing for folks to grasp is that whole concept of no one is above the law. I mean, he definitely seems he is above the law, and worse, he is the law, at least right now.
Yeah. Yes. The idea that no one is above the law, the Supreme Court has changed that rule a little bit by finding that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution, but only for things conducted within the scope of their official duties. There's still room to hold a president accountable in his personal capacity. And in fact, that indictment that Jack Smith dismissed could be resuscitated because you may recall it was superseded to address conduct that President Trump committed in his personal capacity as a candidate. But you're right that now he essentially is the law. He went to the Department of Justice and gave a speech in its Great Hall last year and said, I am the nation's chief law enforcement official, right. Not my attorney general. I am. And his face appears now on a banner that hangs outside the building. I mean, he really does seem to be trying to communicate this message that I am the law and I am untouchable. And I think it creates this feeling of omnipotence and maybe helplessness and hopelessness for some of his political rivals.
Yeah. Well, you frame this president and his administration by corruption, cruelty, and chaos. In what major way have these vices worked for him? And perhaps even more importantly, why might they ultimately serve as his downfall?
Yeah, so, certainly the corruption, it seems that the president is doing everything he can to monetize the presidency, selling his own cryptocurrency and rewarding donors who can come have dinner with him, or even this big UFC fight he just had this weekend. His crypto firm was one of the sponsors. And so, he sells everything from terry cloth robes to bathroom slippers to monetize the presidency. Our emoluments clause says the president's really just supposed to earn his salary while he's in office. He gets $400,000 a year. I don't know about you, but I could live on that. Lives rent-free in the White House, $50,000 in expenses, and yet he is exploiting his time as president, I believe, to enrich himself and his friends. So that's the corruption part. The cruelty, I think, is an effort to drive a wedge between segments of American society. And so treating minorities and especially immigrants as other. Certainly, aggressive enforcement of immigration laws is within the president's purview. I think many people voted for him to do exactly that. But he does it in a way that is dehumanizing. If you look at some of the things they post on the White House website or on social media, it is an effort to make people see them as less than human and to cheer when they are disparaged. I mean, think about that. Remember when they sent immigrants to that terrorist prison in El Salvador? There was a video, slick Hollywood-style production with dramatic music, showing these men being forced to their knees and their heads shaved in their underwear, and then shoved into a crowded jail cell. And then an image of Kristi Noem, who was the Secretary of Homeland Security at the time, wearing a Rolex watch, standing in front of them, giving a speech. I think that cruelty is an effort to make us lose our humanity and see people as other, so that the president can divide and conquer us. And then finally, the chaos. I think that comes when you surround yourself not by the best and brightest, but instead by those who are willing to be loyal to you. There's a term in authoritarianism called engineered incompetence. And that is, it isn't an accident that the people who are in Trump's cabinet, maybe Pete Hegseth and others, Kash Patel, are very non-traditional and do not have the kinds of resumes one would expect for such lofty positions. But instead, when you put someone in these positions who know they could never get this in any other administration, they are so grateful that they are willing to do anything the president asks them to do. It's why experts believe Vladimir Putin so badly miscalculated in Ukraine. He surrounds himself with sycophants who give him overly optimistic projections about what's going to happen when he invades Ukraine. He thought it'd be over in a week. Here we are 4 years later, and there's still a war. And so that's the chaos. I think that when you surround yourself with people who are not qualified for their jobs, chaos is going to ensue. I mean, think about Pete Hegseth with the Signal chat, right? When they accidentally invited a journalist to join in. I think the really gross miscalculation of the attack on Iran. They appear to be close to negotiating some sort of settlement, but we're not going to be any better off than we were before we went into the war 4 months ago. Meanwhile, 13 service members have lost their lives. Gas and oil prices have skyrocketed. Hundreds of schoolgirls were killed in a school that was attacked. And so I think that is the inevitable result of appointing people who are not competent to do their jobs.
Yeah, but to your point, and to stick with the theme of your book, it's that loyalty, it's like being a made man, right, in the mob. And it's probably the most mob-like virtue of his cabinet is that crazy loyalty. Not because of deep appreciation and respect, but because fear and just access, power, greed, money, whatever. It is so mob-like.
Yeah. Well, and we've seen if you cross Donald Trump, he goes after you times 10. That's a mob tactic because it is designed not only to punish you for your breach of loyalty, but to send a message to everyone else out there that this is what happens. This is the consequence. If you betray your trust to me, I will punish you by a factor of 10. And of course, with the president, loyalty is a one-way street. And so, he's willing to throw people under the bus if they do not perform to his preferred level of capability. But it is there's a code of silence. You don't admit about misconduct. And you must praise the leader. These cabinet meetings have become just embarrassing, where they just go around and try to outdo the next guy by talking about how great the president is. Meanwhile, he's in a corner snoring because he's dozed off.
Those meetings are incredible because forget what the cabinet members do. I'm always fascinated that he sits there and just does, like, a normal person will be like, all right, guys, enough with this already, right? Like, all right, I know I'm the boss and you got to kiss my ass. That he loves it so much over and over and over again says something about his pathology. I mean, it is just mind-numbing,
Yeah.
We touched on this a little bit before. Trump, as we all should remember, was indicted 4 times in New York on 34 counts of falsifying business records, the hush money case, federal indictments both on retaining classified documents and for fraudulent interference in the 2020 election, and then by Georgia for 2020 election interference. You discuss in the book the delays that allowed him to ultimately escape justice. Talk about that a little, and perhaps who we should all be a little angry at.
Yeah, it's easy to second guess in retrospect. I don't think that people like Merrick Garland or even Fani Willis ever anticipated that Donald Trump would return to the presidency. I think it was a big miscalculation. And so instead of perhaps acting with the kind of urgency they should have, they waited. Reporting indicates, and I guess I can't say this for sure, but reporting seems to be pretty reliable, that at the Justice Department, they didn't really begin to look into the misconduct of Donald Trump until about a year after taking office in 2021. And that was really a wasted year, I think, because by the time Jack Smith came around and filed the indictment, Trump was already a candidate for president. And so he was able to say, they're only going after me because I'm a threat to Joe Biden in his reelection. If instead this had happened right away, I think it would have been harder for him to say that, and maybe harder for him to have gained the nomination. I also think that Jack Smith ran out of time. He got appointed pretty late in the game, so I don't fault Jack Smith. Maybe it's Merrick Garland or those who work under him in, I think it comes from a good place. I think it comes from wanting to be scrupulously apolitical and wanting to build a case from the ground up, which is a traditional way of building a case. But I think as a result, it cost them a year. And so Jack Smith was able to get that indictment. But remember, there's the motion to dismiss on the basis of immunity for presidential immunity. And then that case got decided in the Supreme Court in July of 2024. He got the superseding indictment in August, but it was really too late because by the time of the election and the view of the Justice Department that a sitting president cannot be prosecuted, he had to dismiss that case, though voluntarily. Fani Willis, I think, worked a little more rapidly. She got her indictment much sooner. But of course, her case fell apart because she had an inappropriate romantic relationship with an underling. That had nothing to do with Donald Trump's guilt or innocence, but it was a huge distraction that really derailed that case. And so I say shame on her for lacking the professional judgment to see that case through when she had a strong responsibility to do so. Alvin Bragg got a conviction. The public seemed not to care so much about it. And there was also the indictment in Florida, which I still think is a very big deal, the retention of very sensitive national defense documents. But that one, too, had to go away when Donald Trump was reelected to the presidency.
And not the most objective judge in alien canon, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Many Americans assume the courts will ultimately save us from Trump's abuses of power. Do you think, given what we've seen in the first 18 months of his second term, that that's realistic, especially given the mounting losses that he experiences in the lower courts and even at the Supreme Court level? Or are we asking judges to do more than the Constitution ever intended?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think the courts have stopped some of his worst instincts. The court stopped his tariffs. I think the courts will stop his efforts to redefine birthright citizenship. That can really only be done, I think, through a constitutional amendment. Courts have stopped his name from appearing on the Kennedy Center and ordered it removed. And so we have seen courts halt some of the things. The Supreme Court even halted his use of National Guard members in Chicago. So there has been a room for courts to stop him. I think that as we approach the Supreme Court level with some cases that will be decided in the coming weeks, there is an appetite there for what they refer to as the unitary executive theory, which is strong executive power. And so I think they may enable some of the things that Trump wants to do in terms of firing members of the executive branch. I don't think it's because they've, got it in the bag for Donald Trump. I think they just happen to share that view of a strong executive who has the ability to fire anybody in the executive branch. But as Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson seems to write in every one of her dissents, this is coming at the exact wrong time, people. Like, hey, fellow justices, we've got this power-hungry president. Of all the times in our nation's history to say, yeah, we want to expand the powers of the president, this is not it. We're supposed to be a check. So I think the courts can be a check to some extent, but there's certain questions they call political questions that they say are not justiciable. For example, political gerrymandering. And so I don't think the courts can save us. I think they can check some of the president's worst instincts. But, I think in the end, it's really up to the people. When I was a manager and I got some training on how to, manage and troubleshoot and help people perform at a higher level and what to do with discipline. And one of the things that stuck with me is the best way to be a good manager is to hire good people. And I think, we the people have the ability to hire a better president next time around. And I hope we exercise our votes wisely.
Yeah, well, a lot of people just feel exhausted right now and powerless. And you write that, quote, this book is about power, how it is acquired, how it is abused, and how we, the people, can take it back. And you believe that we can save America, and you offer solutions. So what are the most effective actions ordinary citizens can take right now that go beyond simply voting?
Yes. Well, certainly the fix talks about some institutional things that require other people in government to effectuate, but there's so many things we the people can do right now. So one of them I learned in my research that there is a political scientist at Harvard named Erica Chenoweth who has studied regime change in hundreds of countries. And she has concluded that if only 3.5% of the public engages in peaceful protest, they can effect regime change. Part of the reason is that the people who are doing the protesting are emboldened by seeing others around them. But it also has effect on the people who are not out there protesting because they see it on television and social media and the internet and other places. And it makes them realize and perhaps wake up if they have not been paying attention that many people are very angry and they can't afford things. That can be a very powerful thing to do. So, if there's a No Kings protest in your neighborhood, think about joining. There are also things we can do on the ground as grassroots political activists. And, if you are not somebody who's engaged in political activism before, it can be a little bit daunting. Like, what am I going to do? But there are wonderful organizations that can put you to work as a volunteer. I mean, one of them that I love is the League of Women Voters. Their job is just to gather information about candidates and share it with the public. They were created in 1920 when women first got the right to vote, and critics said, women, what do they know about anything? How are they even going to know who to vote for? So they said, all right, we'll do the research for them and we'll share it with everybody, men and women alike, and certainly League of Women Voters includes men as well. But they do research on the candidates' backgrounds. They organize candidate forums. They produce voter guides to tell you where candidates stand on various issues. And they need people to help do that work. So whether you'd like to write or help organize or staff a campaign event, all of those things are important. Another group that's out there is called Indivisible. There are chapters all over the country. They too are a grassroots political organization that just try to provide information so people can make a good choice about voting. If you're interested in running for office yourself but have no idea how to begin, there is an organization called Run for Something. And, you don't have to run for president or the Senate. You can run for school board or the library board or the city council. We need people in those positions, which frankly have more effect on our lives than people in Washington because they're so close to home. And if you don't, know how to get started, you go to the website, Run for Something, and they'll tell you. You can work on the campaigns of individuals. Again, you could go for the presidential campaign, but you could also help on local campaigns. County clerks are critically important because they're the ones who control our elections. If you see candidates that you admire who are running for county clerk, get out there and work on their campaign. They need lawn signs delivered and doors knocked on and phone calls made and postcards written. So there are a lot of things that we can do to try to take back our government so that it works well for all of us.
Yeah. And my last question, I want to jump back to Merrick Garland and the delays. Is it time for change? Do we need to go through these standards, these internal memos, these things that have existed for decades? You know, when we acted civilly and respectfully and we all cared about the law, and presidents, believe it or not, also cared about the law. Should we get rid of like no prosecution 60 days before an election or anything? Do we need to just get rid of those things? Do we need to have our attorneys general be more public facing? I mean, we look at what Pam Bondi did and what Todd Blanche does. These people are on TV. Pam Bondi used to go on Fox every day. Merrick Garland, unless he was arresting like a cabal in Colombia, we never saw him. So how much change needs to happen institutionally, like at the DOJ and the FBI?
Yeah, there could be some modest changes, like codifying some of the norms that are currently there. And there's something called the Principles of Federal Prosecution that has a lot of rules about how prosecutors should exercise their discretion to keep politics out of it. If we could codify that into the Code of Federal Regulations, that could help. But if we want to go really bold, I think one of the things that we could consider is creating a fourth branch of government. That was actually considered after Watergate. Instead of having the president control the Department of Justice, maybe others like the Department of Treasury or others that really should be scrupulously apolitical, maybe those are not within the purview of the executive branch. It's a fourth branch of, the administration of good government, whatever we want to call it. And, there could be a practice for how we choose those people with maybe the president appoints and the Senate confirms or something like that, and they serve for 10 years so that they can exceed any one presidency, and they just do their job apolitically. I wouldn't mind that. That's the way we all treated it when I was there in the Justice Department. Maybe we could just make it formal.
Is that legislative change? Is that a
I think it would take a
amendment?
constitutional amendment.
Yeah. Congrats again on the book, Barb. It's called The Fix: Saving America from the Corruption of a Mob-Style Government. Thanks for coming on and being generous with your time, and I hope you'll come back and chat with us again.
You bet. Thank you, Andy.
All righty. Take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.